Greetings, Earthlings. Today we are going to talk about the setup and prep of a Bellon brush mower. We import these Bellon brush mowers in from Italy to fit both the BCS and Grillo tractors and distribute them to our customers as well as a few other dealers around the United States and Canada. The Bellon brush mower is our choice of brush mower because of its heavy-duty cast iron gearbox and very heavy blade carrier system and chains in the back end instead of a rubber flap, which do not wear out and have to be replaced. So when you get your Bellon brush mower in a box, it's going to be in a box like that. We have magically made this one teleport out of its box. Actually, Logan, who is running the camera, helped me lift it. But if you're all by yourself and you don't have help to lift this 150-pound brush mower, I recommend just slitting the sides of the box, just slit the corners, fold the box down, and then slide the brush mower out. In fact, you only have to slit two corners and fold down one side, and then it slides right out. We check these things out at, here at our facility before we send them out. So we've already greased the grease points and checked the gear oil, but you're going to need to do that in the future. And if you want to go ahead and check our work, you're more than welcome. Anyway, the gear oil is inside the brush mower gearbox here. Let me find my tools. There is a Allen head pipe plug in here. Takes an 8mm Allen wrench. And there is no dipstick. This takes 80W90 gear oil. Should be checked once a year anyway. And what you do is just stick a piece of wire in there, an old coat hanger. You can stick a screwdriver down in there. The point is, it should be roughly half full. So you should touch oil. You know, this gearbox is about 4 inches high, so you should touch oil about 2 inches down into there, which we are doing. So that's good. So as I said, we already checked this one, but you've just seen me do it again. So just bring that down until it's nice and snug. As I say, check that at least once a year, twice a year if you feel like it. The other maintenance points are grease fittings. You will need a Zerk type grease gun, which is a standard pump type grease gun. You grease both these fittings until you see grease oozing out around these areas. There's kind of grease oozing out from around here and here. All those fittings do is lubricate the swivel joint that allows this neck assembly to twist. Okay, this is so that when it's attached to the walk-behind tractor, this deck can have some float to it. That's, you know, this will actually stay firm, and the deck itself will float. But I'm doing the same thing here, just kind of in reverse. But all you're greasing with those is those swivel points. This one swivels about 20 degrees. This one on the back only swivels about 5 degrees. But combined, they give you plenty of swivel to handle any kind of ground you're on. Okay, so that's your kind of yearly maintenance as far as lubrication is concerned. There's an owner's manual that comes with it, of course, in 20 languages. One thing about the owner's manual that you'll notice, this is an MDS machine. When you look at the model number tag here, it'll say, oh yeah, I've got an MDS. And there's an MDS, and it looks very different. Now the whole gearbox assembly looks the same, but the deck looks very different on this thing. That's because this is the European style deck. We had them do a different style deck for the American market, or I should say the North American market. But this is the MDS machine for North America. This big crazy guard in the front and the teeth really didn't do any good. We actually tested it like that. In fact, my own Bellon brush mower looks like this one. And I redid the front end. I didn't like this because it kept catching things and carrying around on those little teeth. The other thing you'll notice in the owner's manual is that they show the blade assembly on the bottom with 4 blades on it. And this one only has 2. And I'll explain that a little later when we start getting into this a little further. So other things about the top end here, this input shaft assembly, basically the PTO input shaft where it connects to the tractor, this assembly is actually adjustable up and down in a small range, about 10 degrees, maybe 15 degrees. That's because not all walk-behind tractors have the same size wheels on them. Some have smaller wheels, some have larger wheels. That's going to make the PTO hookup of the tractor lower or higher. So this, you know, this feature is designed to let you adjust the angle of your input shaft to match the tire size that's on the machine. Because what's important is that your deck is flat with the ground. You don't want your mower deck pointing up in the front or or down in the front. You want these skids, these big slides on the side, which adjust your cutting height, you want those to lay flat on the ground. So after you get your brush mower, you're going to want to hook it up to the tractor and check that adjustment first thing, because that's something we cannot preset here. We don't know, I mean, well, if somebody's ordering a brush mower with a tractor, I guess we could mount it onto the tractor and do that adjustment, but that's just a little far fetched, because usually the tractor is set up one day, the implements are set up another day, and we'll just let the customer do this adjustment. It's a very quick thing to do. But of course, a lot of people are ordering a brush mower 3 years after they order a tractor, so we don't know what tire size they have. So this is a very easy thing to do. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to take our G110 Grillo demo tractor, because this is a brush mower that's actually set up to fit a Grillo. I'm going to put it on here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the handlebars around first, because it's much easier to mount implements to any walk-behind tractor if the handlebars are over the implement, and we cover that on our quick coupling videos. So now I can see what I'm doing. I can plug this thing in. Okay, nice, it's all locked down there. Now look what happened. The rear end of my skids came up off the ground. So this angle here is not correct for the tire size that's on this tractor. So what I'm going to do, I'll take a 17mm wrench and I'll loosen up these bolts. These, there's two here and there's two here. These are the pivot points. This is where it pivots up and down. These bolts, you can't see it that well. You can see just the end of a little slot there. That underneath here, this main gray housing is slotted up and down. So that's the bolt that can travel up and down that slot. And that's what is going to lock it into position. We're going to loosen these. You see as I loosen that, the back end of the mower sat down on the ground. So now that those are all loose, I'm going to stand on the rear end of this mower just to make sure it's firm on the ground all the way across. I'm going to put the footprint on there, but that's okay. And I'm going to retighten these. That's all there is to it. Just on a level surface, loosen those up, let the mower level itself on the ground, and crank these buggers back down. You want to get them good and tight. And if you've got a torque wrench, you can put these things at 37 foot-pounds. I don't have a torque wrench with me right now, so it's 3 grunts. Okay. Built-in torque wrench. Okay. All right, now this thing is set and ready. Now, once a year, if you want, you can take these bolts out completely and remove this sheet metal safety cover. Under this thing, you will find the universal joint, because of course, when we flex this shaft up or down, that power coming through the shaft has to be able to flex. Well, there's a universal joint in there, just like the U-joint in your car drive shaft or a truck drive shaft. And that U-joint has a grease fitting on it. Now that U-joint is not flexing very far at all, so it doesn't need grease very often. But if you want to do it once a year, it'll probably extend the length or the service life of the U-joint. What you have to do though, you take the cover off, and then since these bolts are out, that thing will just flex either direction. Flex it all the way one direction, and that'll flex the U-joint far enough that you can actually get a grease gun into the grease fitting. Because when that shaft is more or less straight, there's not enough room between the yokes of the U-joint to get a grease gun in there. But if you flex it all the way, you can usually work it in there, grease it until grease oozes out of the bearings, just like any U-joint. Somebody else can get the phone. All right, so there's that. I'm going to go ahead and pop this off of here because I'm going to flip the mower out. This feature that I've just described here with adjusting the neck angle also holds for the Xenon brand lawn mowers we sell and the Del Marino brush mowers. They all have that feature. All right. So the skids on the side that I've already talked about are adjustable in height. You have 4 positions here. And if you change the height, right now they're set as far down as they'll go, which is actually holding the brush mower up off of the ground as far as it will go. The mower's about 4 inches high right now. What I was going to say is if you change the height significantly, like if I were to go from the top to the bottom holes here and move these all the way up, that would also affect the angle of operation, because you've just taken that mower deck, which was flat, and you've brought the whole thing down. So you might have to reset this neck angle as well to get the deck flat again. The other thing I've noticed is just during the course of using the machine, whenever you run into an immovable object with the front of the deck, say running into a tree or a big rock or a building or something like this, the driving tractor, which is hooked to the PTO input shaft assembly, is pushing on the top of the deck, of course. That's where the tractor's connected. So whenever the front end of the deck hits something, the push kind of goes up. So what will happen eventually, by the end of a season or two of work, you might, just be looking at the tractor from the side one day and say, hey, my deck is pointing downhill in the front. That's because you've hit enough things that you've slid these bolts. So just loosen it up again and perform that leveling the leveling operation, whenever you need to. If you keep them good and tight, it won't happen that much. But I've even seen people who thought those bolts were supposed to remain loose, and the deck just flops up and down. It's terrible, and they keep losing the bolts, of course. Those are supposed to stay tight. Anyway, under here we've got the blade carrier or blade disc, and then we've got the swinging blades or swinging blade tips. I'll flip all the way over here so we can see this better. All right, so this is a heavy metal disc with these two blades attached. The blades, of course, can swing so that if you hit an immovable object like a stump or a rock or whatever, the blades just fold back and don't destroy the gearbox. That's all very good. As I mentioned, the owner's manual shows this thing with 4 blades mounted to it, and you can see the extra holes here. We spec them out with 2 blades on them because when we tested our first one of these, it came with 4 blades. And we tested it with 4 blades, and we tested it with 2 blades. And in brush conditions, this is designed as a brush mower, we did not see any significant performance difference whether it had 2 or 4 blades in brush. Now, if you were cutting grass, like a lawn, it gave you a little better cut with 4 blades on it because it's a relatively low-speed mower. That is, this blade doesn't turn as fast as a lawnmower blade. It's designed for a little more torque, so it's lower speed, higher torque. So if you wanted a finer cut for a lawn, you could put 4 blades on it, but who's mowing a lawn with a brush mower? So what we looked at this as is this is an opportunity to have 2 extra holes. Because the fact is, when you take this thing out into the woods and are mashing around on stumps and rocks and banging these blades all over the place, eventually the bolts, the holes that the pivot bolts are bolted into will get deformed. The steel will get bent up from the impact. Your holes will get ovalized a little bit. And when these holes are shot, you just buy a new blade carrier? No, you've got 2 brand new holes. So you can switch over to your extra set of holes and get twice the life out of your blade carrier. So that's great. And then, of course we sell the blades individually. And they can be sharpened if desired. They're sharp on both sides actually, so you can not only sharpen them, but flip them over. Now they're only ground on one side. This is upside down now, so we can't see the grind. It's ground on the top side. But since this is a brush mower and these blades are just flat, it makes no difference in performance whether they're mounted right side up or upside down. So by flipping the blades over and using the good sharp side of them, they work just fine. So after both sides are dull, you can take them and sharpen them up. Just make sure that they're relatively the same size. If you hit a big rock with one and you take a big gouge out of the blade, then that blade's going to be lighter than the other blade and you could get it out of balance. So anytime you're using a machine like this and you feel a vibration, don't use it. Check your blades out, make sure that you haven't chipped one blade badly and it's lighter than the other, causing an imbalance. Make sure that your blade carrier bolts are holding this blade carrier onto the hub securely. And that's another thing, speaking of which, that you want to check, I'd say 2 or 3 times a year. This is probably one of the most important things to check about this because this is a heavy blade carrier and it's taking a lot of abuse beating against hard objects, immovable objects or cutting big saplings or whatever. So there's a lot of impact being transferred through these blades, through the blade carrier back to the blade drive hub in the center. These 2 bolts are carrying all that beating. We actually install hardened bolts in these and we put Loctite on them, so they are ready for a lot of tough service. But if you beat around on this thing for 3 or 4 seasons, whatever, and never tighten these bolts, you could have a problem. We've had a few calls where these bolts have backed out and the blade carrier actually comes off the machine. Nobody's been hurt, thank goodness. But the point is, if you check those bolts once a year, that's not going to happen. There's no way it's going to happen in a year. If you ever have to remove the bolts to service the blade carrier or replace the blade carrier, have some blue Loctite around to Loctite the bolts back in. We carry new bolts, Loctite can be gotten at any auto parts store. And torque these bolts to, I believe, we have a piece of paper in with the owner's manual that shows what the torque of these is. I can't remember right off the bat, but it's 60 or 65 foot-pounds or something like that. But those are 12 millimeter shank bolts with 19 millimeter heads, and they'll take a lot of torque. So that's it for the bottom side. There is, if we were to take this blade carrier off, we would see there's a big seal protection ring on the top end that protects the oil seal in the bottom of the gearbox from crap wrapping up around this thing. It's not a bad idea every year or two to go ahead and take off the blade carrier and just make sure that that crap hasn't gotten past that seal protector and is starting to wrap up around your shaft. Because of course brush mowers deal with tall material and you don't want to be damaging your shaft by wrapping things up on there. Just flip this back over. The other things that you want to check, maybe once a year is plenty, are just all your bolts. As I said before, this thing takes a lot of beating. You're out hitting saplings, rocks, stumps, whatever. So like the bolts that mount the back end of the gearbox housing, these are 17 millimeter bolts. Put a wrench on those once a year, make sure they're good. Put a wrench on these. There are nuts on the bottom of these. Now to get to the nuts, you would have to remove the blade carrier on the bottom, but it's still not a bad idea to tighten them. There's also another cover like this on the bottom of the gearbox, and those bolts are accessed from the bottom. When you have the blade carrier off, you can see them. Put a wrench on those or a socket wrench. Make sure they're torqued down good. Those are all 10 millimeter shank fasteners with 17 millimeter heads, so they'll take 37 foot-pounds of torque. So, keeping oil in it, keeping everything tight will ensure that you use this thing for many, many years in the future. I mean, we've got a 3/16 plate steel deck on this thing. It's built like a tank. And so far, my father-in-law hasn't been able to tear ours up, which is pretty incredible. So, thanks for watching. Take care.